Good morning, everyone. Today is the 209th day of the beginning of the Russian invasion to the Ukraine. Most people didn't believe it could happen. Most people didn't believe that the Brits will vote Brexit, that France showed it, and that global warming is bringing about imminent catastrophes. It seems that we tend to be too optimistic. The Russian invasion to Ukraine brings about unprecedented pictures from the heart of Europe. Mega battlefields, rows of tank, artillery, masses of soldiers, a picture that the world that witnessed did not witness since World War II, and were believed to be gone forever. Pictures of masses of refugees, bombed cities, torture chambers, and mass graves. For many of us, erasing the color from the pictures will immediately resound with pictures we grew up with from the Holocaust, World War II, 1940s. And after more than 6 months of into this war, one might even think that we are reminded of the trenches of World War I. Our local history here is dominated by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Israeli-Arab conflict. But in the 7 months of the Ukrainian war, the death toll, both civilians and combatants, is already larger than in 100 years of conflict, Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so to the unprecedented number of refugees. The Minerva Center for the Rule of Law, under extreme condition, decided to dedicate this event, the Ukrainian war, adjunct to our board meeting, which took place yesterday. And this event is co-organized by the Avtovitzer International Center for Risk, Liability, and Insurance. We want to touch briefly on the general international law aspects of the war, but also on other global impacts of the war on refugees, food security, and climate energy nexus. We want also to discuss the legal aspects of the economic warfare, which plays a significant role in this conflict. It is my honor and pleasure to invite for opening words the ambassador of Ukraine to Israel, Yevgen. Dr. Korniychuk is a fellow legal scholar. He holds a law degree from the Kiev State University and an LLM from SMU School of Law in Texas. In 2009, he completed his PhD in Kiev Institute of State and Law on jurisdictional immunities of countries and their properties. Before his appointment to be ambassador in Israel in October 2020, Dr. Korniychuk served as parliament member, deputy minister of justice, and was also in various posts in the private and even financial sectors, as well as a lecturer at the Diplomacy Academy of the Ukraine. Dr. Korniychuk started his diplomatic career as vice consul in New York and continued as counselor in the division of US and Canada and head of the division of international treaties at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm grateful to the law faculty of your distinguished university for holding such an event. This is one of the first public events worldwide that is fully dedicated to the current cruel and unjust war that had been started by the Russian Federation. February 24th this year, and continued for almost the last 7 months. So I want you to judge me as a friend, and I was trying to look on the various materials available on the international media. By my background, I used to be a lecturer in both Kiev State University, International Law School, and Diplomatic Academy, but that was a long time ago. So I should underscore a few important matters that we rather will be focused. And I think that the complex overview have to be given within the next few months, because we see that the aggression is not close to the end, and Russia have changed the certain requirements and the goals, but still they've been shelling our cities, and our civilians are suffering. Our civil critical infrastructure is under the threat and the attack every single day. So, first of all, through my long diplomatic and legal career, I consider myself rather a lawyer than a diplomat. I should say that Russia recognized Ukraine as a fully independent state back 1992, when the Soviet Union collapsed. In addition to that, I want to underscore that when Ukraine was giving up the nuclear arsenal, the nuclear weapon, back in 1994, Russia was the guarantor of the Ukrainian independence and territorial integrity among the other nations like the US, Britain, France, and China. So basically, for me as a lawyer, it's a complete nonsense. Russia was the number of the numerous treaties recognizing Ukrainian independence and territorial integrity. At least I was working on a few of them as the head of the Treaties division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they were signed by and ratified by the. So what happened afterwards? When the Russian political establishment decided to move away from the rule of law and basically create its own based on the aggression against states. They created a certain in the neighboring nations hold the country, and those nations, those through those territories. I'm talking about Transnistria and Moldova, that Russia holding the control over almost since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they are still holding this control, even though Transnistria have never been recognized by no other states. Then they go forward and acted against Georgia as an independent state in 2008 without the strong opposition of the Western states, unfortunately. So partially this intervention happened with the support of the Navy that was based in Sevastopol, that was a part of Ukraine at that time, without significant opposition of Ukraine as well, unfortunately. So, but at that time, Ukraine was limited, of course, to oppose, but no matter what someone would argue, the annexation of two republics of the northern Georgia and recognition of them as the independent states was the following part of this, aggressiveness of the Russian Federation towards the neighboring nations. Then I just want to remind you that this cruel and unjust war have started more than 8 years ago, since 2014. So we deem it as a local war that caused the annexation of Crimea as the peninsula, arguing that it belonged historically to Russia. So they called the false referendum there under the control of the Russian troops, and then proclaimed the annexation of this territory. And also, in addition to that, they started the local conflict on the Donbas area, on the eastern side of Ukraine. That was happening with a different intensiveness for quite a long time. So basically, that show how the Russian, in their aggressive policy, was just moving forward without substantial opposition of the democratic society around it. So within this act of the full invasion at the beginning of this year, as just the next step of the global willingness of Russia to show that with their forces, they can overcome, or they can just put aside the international rule and order and simply ignore their obligations under the international public. And I will address you at least to two major sources of the international law, which is, of course, the statutes of the UN that have been saying that every member state of the UN have to do all possible means in order to avoid a military conflict and provide for the peace and prosperity around the globe, not just military-wise, but also with all possible means. And for you to understand that, Russia not just a UN member, it's the member of the Security Council. Even though the separate issue for me is very arguable whether the Russia is per se legitimately become the member of the Security Council, because of it, nobody ever voted for that. So he insisted this position from the Soviet Union, and nobody understands why. Basically, before the Soviet Union collapsed, it was represented at the UN at least by 3 member states. That idea was lobbied by Stalin at the end of World War II, just in order to have more votes. This is why Ukraine has had its own Ministry of Foreign Affairs together with Belarus. So where both states represented separately, with the separate votes at the UN, the Soviet Union. So this is why I came to the Ukrainian MFA, was recruited back in 1992 as a young kid, just because I spoke 2 foreign languages. And the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs at that time was 40 people, together with the cleaning ladies, altogether. In a year from that time, 1993, they recruited about 1,500 citizens. So I was on the first wave of this recruitment. So this is showing the aggressive approach of the Russian Federation that put its own interests over the obligations among the international public. And the second important document, not the last one, but I want to mention the one which is the Geneva Convention on the prisoners of war, that both Ukraine and Russia become the members, but Mr. Putin, by his decree in 2019, denounced the protocols to this convention. So Russia become not the member of them in order to avoid responsibility for the military war crimes. And the other document that I want to mention, which is clearly have to be further learned and discussed, is the Vienna Convention on the international treaties. So if you will look on the history of war that started in 2014, Russia claimed Ukraine to follow the Minsk agreements. Even though those agreements has been signed under the threat of the further military aggression of Russia. So under the legal standpoint, that should be null and void completely because of the Vienna Convention. So now when some voices in Moscow are claiming that Ukraine don't want to sign the peace agreements at the moment under the shellings of the Russian bombs and the massive, immigration of our civilians and refugees. So I want to remind you that about 5 million Ukrainians moved to Europe. A few thousands we're having luxury to come to Israel and stay here. And we have about 10 million internally displaced in the territory of Ukraine, moved from the east and the south to the west, which is a huge number. So now, presumably, if we start talking to Russia, so the attempt to speak to find the solution was made in Istanbul, Turkey, in March and April this year. And I think that under the rule of the international public law, the step number one should be the ceasefire and dissolve all troops from the Ukrainian territory in order to start the peaceful discussion. That was demanded by the Ukrainian president. That was a demand of the Ukrainian general government. And the people of Ukraine, in the absolute majority, I'm talking about 90+%, are not willing to trade in their land for territorial integrity for peace with Russia. First of all, you cannot trust, no word. So, and they will use this ceasefire just in order to relocate their troops and try to invade again. And secondly, it's clearly would be null and void under the Vienna Convention because of those agreements was forced to be signed under the threat of the invasion, of the further invasion. So this is two arguments that I want to mention to you immediately. Then I do believe that lasting international wrongful military act of Russian Federation is needed to be addressed clearly with 4 simple steps unilaterally from the Russian Federation in order to start this peace process and discussion with every single war and with the peace agreements. If you look on the World War I, World War II, both was followed with the peace agreements, and that should be the case here. So first of all, the ceasefire is clearly first important issue that have to be achieved immediately without any justification for the Ukrainian side. The second one is the restitution of all losses, including the financial and the human and the humanitarian, etc. The full compensation of the damages, including moral damages. And the last but not least is the guarantees provided by not just by Russian Federation, but the international community, that Russia will not intervene again. So this is 4 major issues that are on the table. Clearly, you don't have to be the lawyer in order to understand, importance and simplicity of those measures to be taken. So the questions that I want to elaborate further is the question of the compensation. That's a tough one. And as far as I remember, for the last 200 years, Russia voluntarily will never agreed to compensate no nation for the damages that it does, including the war with Japan of 1945 that Russia lost. They never compensate. So in order to go to the UN Court of Justice, you basically need the permission of Russia that you will never receive. So clearly, we are talking about jurisdiction. We are very limited in terms of the sources of jurisdiction, how to bring Russia to the fair compensation for what it does. So here is 2 issues that would be further learned, and I know that our delegation liaison with the Israeli scholars as well. They have been preparing the draft of the convention multilateral agreement that will be presented on the 77th session of the UN now, in order to create a ad hoc mechanism, in order to bring Russia to justice, even without Russia's will. How to do that? Simple. You will look on a story of the most Western nations, including the US, Canada, most of the European states, that freeze the Russian state-owned and the Russian state-owned companies' assets in their territories. So since the war began, the United States, for example, freeze all the funds of Russia in the amount of just cash over the 200 billion USD on the US territory. And I do believe that with the international effort and the effective work of our international legal community and of course Ukrainian lawyers that need to prove the damages, of course, on an internationally justified manner, we will achieve the result and create this ad hoc tribunal, similar to Tokyo for the one after the World War II. At the moment, the other source of the compensation would be bringing the Russia responsible to the local courts jurisdictions. And Ukraine has moved ahead with these steps. So Supreme Court of Ukraine decided that the sovereign immunity is not longer granted to the Russian assets in Ukraine because of Russia, sorry to say, that it's not fulfilling its own obligations before the international. So they start to freeze the assets and basically nationalize them and use them in the interest of the Ukrainian armies. So those steps have been done already, and they need to be very proactive and fruitful. If you look on the demands of the Russian Federation, I have 5 more minutes. If you look on the demands of the Russia, Mr. Putin, before the war started, they was talking about demilitarization, neutrality of Ukraine, about denazification, and hell know what does it mean. But I want to elaborate further the issue of the neutrality, which is currently, after this full invasion of Russia, deemed to be irrelevant. Initially, Ukraine has called in its own constitution the neutrality as the part of our legislation before Russia started the aggression. So I might be wrong with the numbers, but after the aggression of 2014, Ukraine put into its own constitution that we are aiming to be the members of the EU and NATO. So this is the part of our legislation that we are not able to change. But still, the rumors about possible changes was flying around when the war started. But then, if you look on the world society, it comes contrary. If you're going to look on the history of Finland or Sweden, that used to be the classical neutral states after the World War II, they changed. They recently was voting with their national parliaments, and some of the parliaments of the NATO members already voted for them as the NATO members. So you cannot trust the foreign state under the international law obligations. So you need to defend yourself. That's what Israel did all the time. You guys well know not to trust anyone except your own army. And I think we will follow your example very closely when the war is over. We already follow this. So this is why the neutrality is not relevant anymore. So say a few words about ideology. So if you will think about the World War II, the Nazis regime and their close alliances like Mussolini regime in Italy, they has had their ideology. Unlike Mr. Putin, they don't. They simply claim that nobody likes Russia and we have to defend ourselves, and this is a proxy war for them. They are saying that they are fighting the West in the territory of Ukraine, which is the nonsense, of course, because we are paying, for the liberation of the West with the lives of our own people. That's, unfortunately, we have no other choice. But this, invasion is lacking the simple ideology. It doesn't have it. Saying that Ukraine is a fake state, this is why we have to bring it back, to Russia, to the control of Russia. It's not the ideology. This is nonsense. Also, although I could speak much longer, but the basis of the bringing the Russian oligarchs, because this is the question that has been asked quite often, why? And unfortunately, I have to say as the investor that Israel is not always following the Western examples, claiming that the Russian oligarchs that have the right for the Israeli passport, they can bring their wealth to Israel without any punishment or any arrest or such. So if you look on the Russia as a state, and I was shocked, first of all, saying a few words about the system, which is completely corrupt oligarch system, which is different from the rest of the Western society, which is controlled completely by the law enforcement and secret services. Former KGB, which is the FSB at the moment, whatever they call it, and Mr. Putin became prime minister and then the president, following his position of the head of the FSB. So this organization is controlling the country completely, and you are not allowed to make the fortune if you are not basically collaborate with power. So this is why all major fortunes of the Russian oligarchs have been made in a close collaboration with the regime. So, and now they have no choice but support the regime. So currently, the very last news that they forced to create their private armies to bring them to Ukraine.
Private military companies.
Yeah.
PMCs.
PMCs, yeah. That's what they're creating right now. So for me as a lawyer, it's the justification in order to arrest the assets of those people that are closely collaborating with the regime. And that's what the Americans did, that's what the Canadians and most of the Europeans does. So you will look on the British example, which is hilarious, because lots of the Russian assets or money of those oligarchs was in the British banks. If you look on a simple Monaco example, a little country, without any demand of Ukraine, they freeze the West assets of Russians overnight. And it was believe me, it was hundreds of billions of dollars. And null and void the residency permit for all the Russian citizens that live in Monaco. So if you guys believe that you are the part of the Western world, you have to step ahead and do the same. Because I think it's a very big point to argue that because of they become the Israeli citizens, they can do whatever they want. They don't. As long as they are not threatening Israel, it's okay. But I think that Russia proved to be the threat to Israel as well, with the whole collaboration with the Hamas and Hezbollah that is happening right now, collaboration with Iran, including the development of the nuclear weapon. And the last astonishing news is that we are shutting down the Iranian drones that have been launched by the Russian forces on the east part of it. So, coming to the conclusion, from the international public law perspectives, it looks pretty simple. So, the aggressor state is trying to show that they don't care about their own obligation under the international public. And in order to keep the world order and move ahead at the globally at the peaceful democratic settlement society, we need all together to force this country to obey the rules of law and to act according to their international obligations and international agreements, including the UN Convention, Treaty, and all the conventions that have been signed afterwards. Thank you very much, and now we have to answer the question. Yes, please.
You mentioned the guarantees given to Ukraine when they agreed to disarm from the nuclear weapons, and they were given security guarantees by the United States and by the United Kingdom. What is the standing of that? And in your view, what does that imply as far as the duties of the United States and the United Kingdom since your neutrality has been violated?
Well, it's a difficult one. I mean, it was the arguments all over the place whether this document that was signed in 1994 was called Budapest Memorandum. It was a pretty simple document. And it says nothing except that if Ukraine will be threatened by the other state, those countries will be immediately called for the consultation. And Ukraine called for the consultation 3 times before 2014. And the war started in a few days after Zelensky has made his speech in the Munich Security Conference, when he said that we probably claim again for this consultation under the Budapest Memorandum, and that's it. And then it probably was a mistake that we gave up our nuclear. He didn't say that we will establish the nuclear power again. He didn't say nothing. But that was good enough for Mr. Putin to justify his invasion. Okay, so I think that it was a lot of the ideas, and as a practicing lawyer and as a lecturer of the international public, I do believe that every single treaty, if it was properly signed, no matter how it called, it can be memorandum, it can be agreement, it can be convention, it can be whatever, exchange of diplomatic notes. All right, if you don't need to ratify them, that's the part of your integral legislation. So, Russia was arguing that that was just intentional document. It has no obligation whatsoever. But listen, we fulfill our part of obligation. We gave up our nuclear arsenal, which was the third biggest one in the world. And guess whom we gave it to? To Russia. And I was responsible for some agreements that we were signing with Russians, giving them those huge aircrafts in exchange of the forgiveness for the debt for gas in the year 1999 that are currently bombing Ukrainian cities. That was 12 super jets capable to carry the nuclear weapon, nuclear missiles that we gave up to Russia afterwards. And I feel guilty myself as a lawyer that we did it. So, of course, now we started to discuss the possibility of the guarantees of the West. The first draft was presented to the neighbors and the friends states just about 2 weeks ago, and is elaborating further. But for me, it's simple. It have to be something similar as the guarantees that was given to Finland, Sweden before they fully joined NATO. They have got those guarantees from the states and Britain. So you don't have to invent the bicycle. You have to take it and we'll basically sign it the same for Ukraine. More victories, more effective counterattacks, Ukrainian armed forces is fulfilling, giving more support to our military from the West. So we completely changed the notion that Ukraine will fall in a week or two or months. We've proved to be strong, and we are resistant successfully. We liberated, about within the last 2 weeks, we liberated the territory of 6,000 square kilometers, which is similar to the half of the territory of Israel.
Survey about the nuclear reactor in Ukraine, what are the conditions, how do you see possible development? The second question, you are a professional expert on international law with your PhD, so retrospectively now, do you have a professional faith in international law and international institutions?
Well, what's the first one?
It's about the nuclear reactor.
Nuclear reactor. Okay, the nuclear reactor is simple. It is currently we are having 5 active nuclear power stations in Ukraine. I'm talking about 5, even though it's 4, because Chernobyl is not operating yet, but it's still active. So you have to count on security around this area. You remember when the Russians came in the first days of war and invaded the north of Kiev Oblast, they was controlling Chernobyl, which was very emotional for us. Nobody knew what was going to happen. So now they are controlling the Zaporozhye, which is the biggest one in Europe. And if anything happens, that would be the threat of the just dirty nuclear chemical disclosure, or just the move of this nuclear threat to all over the place. Depends on where the wind should be. You could go to Russia as well, because Russia is not very far. So you saw that the delegation of the World Nuclear Organization that was there 2 weeks ago, and they proved that the threat is not coming from the Ukrainian armed forces, but from Russia. Russia is using this station in order to shoot as a military base, because of course you cannot shoot on that. And this is the trick that they normally use. And at the same time, they are accusing, of course, Ukrainian armed forces that they are damaging our own nuclear arms, which we have no intention whatsoever. So this is why I do hope that at the end of the day, the demand of this World Nuclear Organization, energy organization, will prevail, and the Russian armed forces will just disclose this nuclear power station. Now, the question number 2 is, of course, more difficult, and you can elaborate for the hours with this issue. But clearly, you know what, my first time I came to Israel was in 2003, when the Ukrainian missile allegedly shot down the Russian airplane over the Black Sea with the Israeli citizens on board. And I was the lawyer for the government. We settled this unfortunate tragedy within a year. I just given you an example of how you can fulfill your international obligations without taking the responsibility, without the assessment of the guilt. The families signed, they have nothing against Ukraine, and they have no right to claim against the Ukraine. They have got the compensation on a proper manner from the government, and they shut it down. So that's a good example how the international law can operate if you want to fulfill the international law. If you don't want to fulfill the international law principles, you could do whatever. You can just play with whatever notion you want, unless you will be seriously threatened by the international society with the sanctions, with the force to use the military power against the aggressor state, with all possible means. You will not bring them to justice otherwise. Those people are not willing to play within the internationally recognized rules, within the obligations that they was taken for them as members of the UN or members of the various conventions under the international. So you have to bring them to the justice and force them to obey the rules that they was accepting themselves.
Thank you for this very interesting talk. According to reports, since the beginning of the war in February, the refugee flows that have been exiting the Ukraine have not included men. Men have been prevented from leaving the country. And a number of commentators have raised questions both about the morality and about the legality of that measure. in terms of their right to leave, in terms of the possibility that they are exposed to ill treatment. Now, the Ukrainian position, I think, on a political level, as I understand it, is that they're needed for fighting efforts. I wanted to hear what is your position on the legal and moral questions involved in that decision?
No. First of all, it is the various exemptions of the general rule that the man could not leave. Okay, the people that do it, the volunteering, the people that bring in the humanitarian aid, the people that are involved on the international collaboration with the foreign states and the citizens are allowed to do it. So you just need to give a permission to apply to the relevant bodies and get the permission to go there. The general rule, I think, is justified because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And my personal view is that nobody will persuade me that Russia will ever not declare the full war, because now they fall into, of course, the special military operation. But if they are fed in a special military operation, we will face their recruiting the millions of men to fight basically in Ukraine, untrained, of course, without the proper weapon. But we are talking in general about the numbers of the recruitments, at least 5 million people from the Russian side. At that point, if that's going to happen, I will easily justify the lack of the ability of the men to travel unless they have fell under the certain exemptions of the law. I'll give you another example. The male can travel with his family if he have 3 children under the age of 18. If he is only the support to his kids under the 18, he has no spouse. It's free to do. If he is a support, only the support to his elderly parents or the people that the kids that he was adopting, the one that needed the constant support, he's free to do. So again, I would say this is the arguable question first. Talking about the human rights issues in general, but listen, we are under the threat of even bigger catastrophe, and we have to acknowledge that the act according to the situation.
Thank you very much.